better participants in the program, and I was very, very proud of them and what they did, and finished the program at just a higher rate, if not higher, than other people who were American citizens and spoke English.
The dollars that are saved by closing these prisons and jails, obviously there's a lot of resources spent on the diversion program and the rehabilitation program. So I think I asked you at a break, which dollars are they, cheaper dollars for the prisons or for the rehabilitation program?
Well, to put somebody on probation is a few dollars a day, and to put somebody in prison is $50 or so a day. And so the difference between the two, and that's what motivated the state legislature and Governor Perry to go forward with this, because what we did, it was called the Justice Reinvestment Act. And so what we did was we took the savings and put them back into treatment and rehabilitation. And so every time we didn't send somebody to the penitentiary, let's say we spent $3 to $4 on them in the community versus $50, that's a significant savings. So we got half of that or some portion of that back into the communities. And so it was a win-win for the state. And closing 3 prisons, that's a big deal.
Yeah, and a long-term solution to the problem.
Yes.
John, let me ask you a question. When you got into the business, I guess best put, when you decided when you were a young lad like your son here, someday I'd like to be an attorney. I'd like to get involved with what goes on in our world. I'd like to be involved in the world of law and what have you, and make the differences that you're continuing to try to make in our communities to make them better each and every day and safer, certainly. I just wondered what it was like then when you had this passion, you had this dream to make this vision your mission. I just wondered how it is today and how you feel that. What are some of the things that you might have been concerned about back then that you felt we needed to change or to make better, and where we are today, and how we as citizens can step forward and be aware of what you're about to share with us?
Well, that's an outstanding question, because I started practicing law in 1982, and I can tell you that someone who was placed on felony probation of any minor offense, if they had a dirty UA, tested dirty for marijuana, we basically had one response, and that was go to the penitentiary. And that's why we wound up loading up the penitentiaries with these folks that had no business being there. And so by the late 1980s and early 1990s, we found ourselves letting murderers and rapists out to hold these folks in. And so we started getting smart on crime. And then I became a judge, and Governor Ann Richards appointed me to what was then the Punishment Standards Commission, and we rewrote a lot of the laws. But one of the things we did, unfortunately, was we tripled our prison space from 50,000 to 150,000. Even though we were trying to do the right thing, we didn't have the knowledge and the skill and expertise. By the time 1998 came along, these drug courts and the knowledge that we had gained from them began to take hold across the United States. And there were a few of us, myself. There was no other judge in Dallas County who was willing to do it. And that's fine. Somebody had to get started, and so I got started with it. And as I was trained and learned more and more and more, I became a trainer. And then I got to travel the country and deal with other people. But one of the most important things to answer your question is I look back on my decisions that I was making, not only as a lawyer, a prosecutor, and defense attorney, and as a judge before I got that training, and I realized how many mistakes I was making. And I really had a sense of guilt about, even though I was well-intended, I was setting people up for failure because I was untrained and I didn't know what to do. And so as I became more and more trained, we took the lessons from the program and transferred them to the court. And then as we became more and more knowledgeable, I began training judges, not only in Dallas, but across the state of Texas and across the United States. So it's a question of taking the information you have and spreading it to other people, not keeping it to yourself and proprietary. You've got to move on with it. And so for the average person, I think one of the things is it's confusing today because several states have legalized or all but legalized marijuana. And we have a lot of people who get on probation in Texas and they go to Colorado and they smoke marijuana and they come back and test dirty and wind up being sanctioned or in jail or revoked, depending on what the situation is. And there's a lot of confusion about that. There's a lot of confusion with our young people. But marijuana is illegal. It is a mind-altering substance. It is not good for you. It will impact your judgment, short and long term. And I think parents need to be aware of that, and I think our young people need to be aware of that. And if your child is smoking marijuana, I think it's incumbent upon a parent to have a conversation with their child or their children about that, what the perils are. The other thing, a lot of kids think, well, I'll just drive around and do it in my car. Well, let me tell you, you get arrested, you're going to lose your license. And if you lose your license, your parents don't have any reason to keep paying for your car, okay? So you might lose your car. And if you get arrested at school, they're going to call the police, and they're going to do things that are not in your best interest. So even though there's, the world of marijuana is not like it was when I was a child and a young man where it was clearly illegal, I think there's a lot of confusion. But I think people in the state of Texas, young people and parents, need to realize it's illegal. It's not good for you. It doesn't benefit you necessarily. And it's just like alcohol. Alcohol's nice. It's legal, but too much of it is too much of it. And even a little bit sometimes can have a detrimental effect on you. And so you should be careful.
You were kind enough today to bring your son with us. Can you introduce him
Yes,
to us?
this is my son, Ethan Crusoe, and he's 16, and he's a student at Bishop Lynch, and I'll let him say a few words.
16 years old. Get real close to that mic, Ethan.
Yes,
and,
sir.
It's your new best friend, my friend. Okay.
All right.
16 years old. So you're a junior, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So future plans. You see what your dad's done with his life. What do you want to do?
Well, as much as he hates to hear this, I actually do want to be a lawyer when I grow up.
How about a job in radio? My gosh, listen to that voice, guys. Holy mackerel.
Calvin's over there laughing. What's up with that?
He's shaking his head. Why, Calvin?
Because I almost knew he was going to say that. The way he said it, I was like,
Like father, like
Yeah.
son?
Yeah, exactly. He's going to want to go there with us.
Well, let us, Calvin's smiling. Steve, how about it? Why is that? Obviously, you have great respect for your dad and what he does, but why is it you would like to follow in his footsteps?
I really see the impact that he makes on people's lives, and it's just unprecedented. And to just be able to affect that many people across the state of Texas and just have that many positive impacts. Everywhere we went, whenever he was a judge on the bench, we would have people walk up to us, "Oh, Judge Crusoe, you did this for my family, you did this for my cousin." And I really can't think of any other profession where you could do that.
So it's better to have him be what he is today than be a Super Bowl champion with the Dallas Cowboys then, huh?
Absolutely.
All right, I like it. Let me ask you this before we move on. When you talk about your dad, if we were just 6 guys here in this room, and you were going to tell us something else about your dad that we might not know, that really has set him apart, that you think is the neatest part about him being a dad, not a public figure, but being a dad, what comes to mind?
Just thinking about it right here on the spot. I mean, he helped us win the championship in 4th grade basketball, so.
All right, well, that's pretty important. I'm sure
Yeah.
you remember it all these years later. But is there a message that he shares with you as a dad to his son? What are some of the life lessons that he's kind of said to you? Make sure you do this, make sure you do this, stay this, stay this, stay this. What comes to mind?
Well, he really just reminds me to stay focused and stay dedicated, in everything, in schoolwork, athletics, no matter what I'm doing, just give 100% towards it, and you can never steer yourself wrong.
Good advice. So 25 years from now, where are you going to be? What are you going to be doing?
Well, hopefully practicing law in Dallas County. This is my home. I've been here my entire life. I know he certainly is shaking his head right now, but that's where I see myself.
Trey, Calvin, we got a minute before break. One of you guys jump in here. You got a question for either one of these fellas?
I have a son also who's a teenager. He's 13, and his mom and I are both attorneys, and that's the last thing he wants to be. So very commendable that you want to be a lawyer like your dad.
Thank you.
And for John, I have a question. Upon successful completion of this program, what does this person's record reflect? Is this
Yeah,
something
well,
that
we had
can
the
be-
law changed a few years ago. It's actually expunged.
It's expunged.
Yeah,
So
so-
not even non-disclosed. So
Right.
full-on expunction. Wow, that's
Right.
awesome.
Yeah,
So-
see, it's a diversion program, so they've never been indicted for this type of program. Now, there's also been a separate law that was put into place for programs like this, and those can be expunged also.
So so it's not a deferred adjudication situation?
No, it's not. No, so if it's a pretrial diversion, you've never really been placed on probation. Now, you may be supervised by a probation department, but you're not on probation. And so there's a provision in the Texas Government Code that allows for an expunction upon the successful completion of these types of programs.
Because that's huge. Because I've dealt with clients that they got in trouble when they were 19 and they're 45 and it's still following them around. So the
Right.
ability to successfully get that expunged after completion of that that's awesome.
So it's an arrest, but they don't get indicted. In other words, it's a diversion from the grand jury.
Not for a diversion program. Now let me warn you, because of the success of this program, we have people who were indicted and who are on probation and were sent to treatment. And what we found through research is that they were doing very poorly when they came back. And so what we have is judicial supervision of those individuals also, but they're on probation. And if they're on deferred probation, they may be entitled to a non-disclosure, but not necessarily to have it expunged. And those are two different things. So what we found is that people have needs. Different people have different needs at various parts of the criminal justice system. Okay, for example, we talk about that's diversion. Judge Robert Francis and I started at about the same time 2 separate courts for those who've been to prison 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Obviously, it's not working. Why are we continuing to do this? It's just madness. And so we developed a program where we would send them to treatment, prison-based treatment, and bring them back and judicially supervise them too. So I had a diversion program going on Tuesday nights, and on Friday mornings for a couple of hours we did that. And then we researched that, and we had superior results there too. So that's part of what we later on took to the legislature, and that's why they were so willing to invest dollars in these programs. And they started kind of naming them after Divert and after, like John Crusoe's program. They did all this stuff in the legislation, which really was inappropriate, but they wanted to make certain that everybody understood what was going on and what they were focusing on. And so as we've started these programs across the state of Texas, and as they've been expanded, that's why you had fewer people going to prison. The other thing was just an ordinary person on probation. We started training our probation officers and probation departments how to better deal with an individual on probation. And that's a whole separate story. But what we got was more success on probation and fewer people revoked to the penitentiary.
John Crusoe is our guest, his son Ethan alongside today as well, and we're going to be back with more right after this.